Hey guys, Brett here at Motion Raceworks, and today we're going to go over some electrical tech tips, some wiring tricks, and the basic connector types that are out there on the market that connect to our sensors, how to crimp the wires, which wire to choose, what kind of sheathing you should use, and some diagnosis if you're having some electrical issues with your car. So when it comes to wiring on your race car or on your street car, there's a lot of really good videos on the internet that go through from the basics all the way to professional motorsports wiring looms. So you can really go from like a mild to wild kind of setup when it comes to wiring. If your car has existing stock wiring and you're adding sensors on or an ECU on, sometimes you're just adding wiring to a car that already exists, or you're fixing wiring that exists, or you're creating a loom from scratch, which can be very technical process. So make sure to research that and follow what you want to learn those kind of skills. Wiring is one of those things where people either love it or they hate it. I feel like there's not really a middle ground between that, and really is kind of the mystery behind it and how important it is. The wiring harness and the crimp and the connector sockets and connections of your race car really make or break your whole program. It doesn't matter what ECU you have or what sensor you have or what engine you have. If the wire that's connecting the two together, or the terminal or the crimp of that wire is not adequate, then you're going to have a complete system failure, engine failure. You're going to lose your race. You're going to lose your race car. It goes bad in a hurry, and there's a lot of cars that really don't do well just because of bad wiring, and you're not going to have a successful program. You're not going to enjoy your car. So we're going to take it back just to the crimp section and to the connector section if you're installing a sensor or a component that we sell, and what we offer to help you accomplish that. Here at Motion and Rife, we do offer a selection of connectors and flying lead style connectors for the sensors and components that we offer. So the sensors we offer, we have a wide variety of connector types that can plug directly into your stock harness, or if you're making a more motorsports inspired harness, we have a full Deutsch line of DTM connectors in every one of our sensor types. We have a pigtail kit with flying lead that you can kind of butt connect to your existing harness, or you can crimp new ones on. We have empty terminals and connector kits here for each style. In my opinion, pigtail flying lead style is going to be the least desirable selection on this, because you're relying on two butt connectors, which are hard to seal from the elements very well for a long living harness and sensor life. What you're going to do is increase your skill level a little bit and your knowledge base, hopefully with this video and a couple tools, to be able to crimp new terminals on and get that wiring harness sealed up nice and tight away from the elements, so there's no moisture or any corrosion that can happen in there, and really give you the best sensor reading and the best life of your wiring harness. So to elaborate a little more on our offerings between an empty connector body crimp style and a flying lead kit, here's our two offerings. This is a GM style Delphi connector for our temperature sensors. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and crimp two wires and terminals onto our GM connector. This is a pull to seat style connection, and one of the easiest ways to identify if you have a push to seat or pull to seat style connector is if it has a secondary lock. So as you can see on these DT and DTM connectors, there's a secondary lock that's going to lock the wire in place from the outside, or even on this 3-pin. This gray piece here is separate. This is our wire lock. On a pull to seat, the lock is built into the connector, so there is no secondary lock. Once you pull that wire in place, it's going to be locked into place. On this style connector, what you're going to want to do is feed both wires through the connector from the back, from the seal side. Now we're going to go ahead and strip back the appropriate amount of insulation. We're going to take our corresponding pin and set this up. The amount that we strip back is going to be enough to sit in the first set of the crimp. The first set of wings will crimp over and grab the wire, and then the second set is going to grab the insulation to hang on to that section. On our crimp pliers, it's labeled for the wire size that we're using. Right now we have a 22 gauge wire, so we're going to use this set. When we go to make this crimp, as you can see, the crimpers have a stand and then a receiving side of the pliers. The stand side is going to go on the back side of the connector, and then the top side, the receiver side, is what's going to fold the wings over and crimp down on the wire. Once we're set up in place, we're going to go ahead and give this a good squeeze. You can't over squeeze. These have a positive stop on them. So if you're in the correct size hole and you have the correct size wire, you're going to basically squeeze those down pretty much as tight as you can and then pull them off. And now that folded it over and it's holding the wires down. Now we're going to go ahead and perform the same step to the back side. Crimp, the secondary crimp, and then it's going to fold over to hold our wires. Now in this style connection, that's a pretty good crimp. It's pretty tight. After you do a crimp, you want to give it a pull test to make sure it holds in place good. This is a very small pin and a small wire. The single stage of crimp does a really good job of this pin. On the other terminals here later, we're going to show you a second stage of a crimp that does a little bit better job than doing a single stage, and it really depends on the wire size and the crimp size. We're just going to do that one more time. Sometimes it's easier to put the connector in the crimper first, slide the wire in, and give it a squeeze. Make sure it's set, the whole crimp is down, and then we're going to go ahead and then do the insulation side. That crimp turned out pretty nice. Both sides are folded over. If you're unsure about your crimp or you feel that it's loose, cut it off, get another pin, and then redo it. Now once we have our terminals crimped, now we're going to pull to seat. You can see there's an indexing tab on this connector, which is going to go into the slot of the housing, and then you'll hear a positive click when that's in place, and then it's locked in. This one's upside down. Now once that's set, our connector's made. This is connected to the rest of our harness. Okay, so now that we've made our 2-pin GM style connector, now we're going to do our 3-pin. This connector type is a push-to-seat style, so we're going to have a separate seal. The terminal is going to go into the connector from the back side, and then a secondary lock is going to go over it from the top. So this connector is made up of a few pieces. We have the connector body, the lock, and then the seal for the wire. This is a double sealing connector. It seals the wire from the back side, and then the seal into the connector of the sensor from the front side. This seal I like to slide on the wire before I strip it, as it doesn't push the strands out of the way. I'll slide it down the wire, give it the strip, and we slide the seal up to the edge of the insulation to the conductor. For this pin, we're going to use the same style of crimpers that we used before. Like to load the pin in the crimper, get it lined up, slide the conductor in place, and go ahead and crimp this down. Now that we have the wire crimped, we're going to move on to crimp these outer wings onto the seal. Earlier I said there's 2 different types of these pliers. As you can see, these are just labeled in wire sizes. These are for non-sealed pins. Then the other pair, which look pretty close, these are a little older, but you can see they have a rounded edge here. This is for the seal. That way it crimps it over and it keeps it nice and round. So it holds the seal to the wire and in place, so when you slide it in the connector, it's good to go. Now earlier I talked about, depending on the pin, you may have to do a 2-stage crimp. This pin is one of those styles. This pin is made to use from 22 gauge wire all the way up to like an 18 gauge wire. So what that is the metal wings are large to accommodate the larger wire. So when you're using a small wire like this 22 gauge, sometimes the pliers doesn't actually crimp the wire tight enough, and it makes a loose crimp and you can pull it out. This one's pretty good. Like, I pulled it apart. You shouldn't be able to pull it apart. When you make a positive crimp, the wire should break before the crimp pulls out. So the fact that I was able to pull that out means that this wasn't a very good crimp. Now, as you saw, I had to put some force to it. It was a decent crimp, but it wasn't super, super good. Now, what I'm going to show you is the second stage of a crimp that you can do to assure that this isn't going to be an issue when using a pin that's made to accommodate a larger size wire or a wide range of size of wire. And a couple of the strands broke. Like I said, that was a pretty good crimp. Say half the wire broke before it pulled out. So we were almost there. That might have lasted a while, but it wasn't as good as it should have been. So now we're pulled back. Gonna load us back up. Crimp that down into place. Now we're pulled. As you saw, this crimp folds over the wings from the top and applies pressure down on the wire. But what it doesn't do is apply much pressure to the back of the pin. So now with our squared off set of crimpers, these are pretty much always labeled in ABC and alphabets like this. These are generic. This is a Blue Point brand, but the same set of pliers is made pretty much in every brand. Now what we're going to do is load the pin backwards, the back side of the crimp to the standoff of the pin, and we're going to give it a crimp from the back side. So what this does is hold the wings. You can see a small indentation there where it's pushing the backside into the wire. So now we have a crimp that's almost 360 degrees around the wire. Now this, you won't be able to pull out. You'll break the wire before you pull that out. I can't do either actually. So that is a positive crimp. Go ahead and finish this off and we'll load it in our connector. Get the seal pushed down. Sometimes when you do this, you'll see that these guys are kind of pointed up. It didn't round them very well. So all to do is I'll just kind of load this back into another one to get them to bend, to hold their shape a little bit. You want that as round as possible to be able to push inside the connector. If these are stood up any, they won't actually push into the connector type. And now we'll find our associated pin to our number on here and load the connector. Typically you can push these in with your hand to the lock. Once you have all three in place, then our secondary lock is going to go down over the top. Now this is locked into place, can't remove. While we're on the subject of an open barrel splice, what I'm going to do now is a splice of similar what you would do for a 5-volt reference or a 0-volt reference for the 0 and 5-volt reference from the ECU branching out to multiple sensors. Depending on the ECU you're using, you're limited to how many 5-volt and 0-volt sensor ground outputs you have. So what you're going to have to do is splice them into multiple sensors, which is totally fine and totally normal. This works fine. These sensors use very, very little amperage, and I haven't actually seen a limit of how many sensors you could put on a single 5 volts or 0 volts. The only thing that you run into that is risky by tying all of your sensors onto one 5-volt reference is if you have a short somewhere in your harness or you have a sensor fail and short out, it can take out the 5-volt reference, and then at that point it will take out any sensor that's tied to that signal because it's going to be spliced together. So depending on how many 5-volt and 0 volts you have in your car, when you lay out your harness and when you pin out your ECU, what you want to do is take the most critical important sensors, your crank sensor, your map sensor, IAT sensor, fuel pressure, the sensors that take the signal to run the engine for the ECU. Without these signals, your engine wouldn't run. I like to put them on one 5-volt, one 0 volts dedicated on themselves, and some of your accessory style sensors or your diagnostic style sensors that don't play such a crucial role, we can put them on the other 0 volt or the other 5 volts. So if something does happen to them, at least it's not going to cost you a run or shut your car off and not going to go ahead and run. So in this instance, what we're going to do is connect one wire to 3 wires. And we're going to do that doing one single open barrel splice. Go ahead and strip all of the wires. Now these are to simulate our 3 wires, so this would go to 3 individual sensors, and this side of it is going to go to our single 5-volt or 0-volt reference from the ECU. There's different sizes of these crimps depending on how many wires you're using. This one is a little large for this, but does a pretty good job. I'm going to get all of those guys in there together, all of the wires lined up, and we're going to go ahead and make our crimp down. And then like before, we'll take our heat shrink with our adhesive, shrink over that, and now we have a single connection in line from 1 wire to 3 wires to splice out to our sensors. So now we've done a couple open barrel crimps with the seal and without a seal, and you got to see the couple different tricks and what to look for on that. Basically, after you get your crimp, you just take a visual inspection. Does it look like it's folded over good? Does it do a pull test? Does it feel like it's crimped well? You want to make sure that you know. If you're scared to pull on that wire because you think it's going to come out, it's probably going to come out. When it's going to come out is when you're halfway down the racetrack and when you don't want it to. So you want to go ahead and cut that off, even if it means you have to order another pin if you don't have one laying over. To take the time to make that crimp correctly now is going to save you a lot of headache and possible engine damage or just a bad outing later on down the road. Okay, now we're going to move on to our Deutsch DTM style connectors. These are all a push-to-seat style connector with a secondary lock. These connectors are easier to use from an assembly standpoint and are much more serviceable than the other style. Those GM pull-to-seat connectors, once those are together, they take a really small special tool to depin them, and most of the time when you do that, the lock actually breaks and you can't actually reuse it because the pin will pull out. So they're not really a serviceable connector. Once they're assembled and made, that's pretty much it for them. The nice thing about the DTM is they are serviceable. If you need to change something or diagnose something, you can pull the pins out really easy. Or you pin it wrong because you weren't paying attention to the numbering and you need to switch them around, you can undo them really easy, and we'll show you how to do that. I'm going to clip into this.
Just a rolling.
All right. The Deutsch connectors use a closed barrel crimp, sort of like the splices, but they're not going to use the same tool. They're going to require the ratcheting style tool for a closed barrel that's going to come around with the jaws on either side of the crimp, 360 degrees, and crimp down on the wire. These tools each come with a different set of settings for the wire size. The opening is the same, but how far it crimps down is going to be dependent on which setting you have it on the tool. Some tools are labeled with generic numbers and others have the wire size. Depending on which tool you have, make sure you reference the chart so you have the right crimp for the right size wire. If you under crimp one, obviously it's going to pull out. If you over crimp one, it's going to actually cut the wire and cut the strands inside, and it's going to break off. So you just make sure you have it on the right setting, and then the height is going to be set to the right height. We'll show you that, and then you're good to go. On the Deutsch pins, you'll see a small hole on one side of the connector. This hole is a window to make sure that you have the wire in far enough for your crimp. The appropriate amount of strip for this wire is for the wire to go in, be visible in the hole, and then not stick out too far past the end of the actual crimp itself. This could be a slightly shorter, but it's decently set up. Depending on the tool that you're using, it may or may not have a preset back head, or it may be open on the back side. This is a manual setting, so when you drop the pin in, you can screw the screw up and down to set where the crimp's going to be. What you want to set is for the crimp jaws to be directly in the center between the end of the pin and the window hole. That's going to crimp right in the middle of the wire and be in the correct spot. I'm going to go ahead and load the pin into the crimpers. Sometimes it just gets caught up. Want to make sure it falls down to the bottom. This is a ratcheting set of crimpers, so it's going to hold into place. We have our wire strip. I'm going to put him into the pin and then squeeze until it releases. And then we have our crimp. Now that we've made our crimp, we're going to go ahead and load the pin into the connector. These connectors are numbered. Sometimes their numbers are in different spots, so you have to look around. This one's numbered on the top, 1 and 2. So this is pin 1, this is pin 2. Sometimes these numbers are on the side, or sometimes these numbers are on the face. If there's no numbers at all, you can reference the internet and try to find a picture of the connector and then see where the locking tab is and know to the right or to the left of that is 1 or 2. So if there's no numbers there, you usually can reference back to a photo and determine which one there is. Now to load this pin in the connector, it's going to slide through the seal in the back, and then it's going to catch a spring lock on the inside to this lip. There's a couple ways to do this. Depending on the stiffness of the wire, sometimes you can just load these by hand until it clips, or sometimes you can't. It stops right there. The proper way to load these are with these plastic tools. One of the reasons why they're plastic is so when they slide down over the seal, they don't actually cut the seal. This is going to allow you to push directly onto the connector, into the body, until you hear it click, and then you're going to be able to pull it out, and then our pin is then seated on the inside. The pin here on the inside, might be able to see the locking tab down there. If you need to remove this pin, you're going to take a depinning tool, kind of hold pressure on the back side of the wire, and just push up on the lock away from the pin, and then pull the wire out from the back. They don't take a lot of pressure on the lock, so you can just peel it out, and then they're reusable. It's not going to break. The other way to seat these connectors, if you don't have this plastic tool, is with your depinning pin. Sometimes you can sneak this here on the back side, and then use that to push into the seat. You want to be careful with these because you can cut the seal, or you can push too far and damage the connector. But if you don't have this tool and you're in a pinch and the wire is a little too flimsy to load by hand, You can load them from the back like that. After our wires are in place, we all have 3 loaded. Then we're going to take our lock, which is specific for this connector. If you bought a connector kit, it's going to come with it. They'll have a tab on it. To load these in, you'll need to grab that tab with a little pair of pliers. The notches go towards the pin. You push that down. You'll feel it engage. And now the wire lock can't be released because the tab is holding it in place. The last connection type we have in our sensor lineup is the Rife M5 connector. This is a small 3-pin connector that has a clocking tab and then screws on to the sensor. We offer these cables in pre-terminated lengths of 1.5 feet, 3 feet, and 6 feet. These pre-terminated cables are designed to wire into a temperature sensor and then feed the side of a Rife block, which then the input is passed through the D-key connection through the board within the Rife block. If you want to run a Rife M5 style connector but don't have a block to wire the other side to, we offer a Rife M5 finishing kit, which is this connector blank which you have to solder the pins on. It's very small and difficult to work with. I find the easiest method to do is to cut this cable, splice the wires back, and then crimp on a DTM or another style connector on the end of this to make a pigtail style to connect to your harness if you wish to do that. Or you can buy the sensor with a DTM connection or GM connection style, whichever your harness has. Okay, so we've gone over all of the basic wire and connector types that we deal with the most with Rife sensors and the products that you'll purchase from us. And hopefully you learned something with this video. Again, remember the key takeaways is proper wire sizing, using the correct connector type for your sensor. Try to use butt connectors as least as possible. Seal the connector, seal the harness as good as you can from outside elements because these sensors are the life of your engine and your ECU operates off of them. If any of these crimps or wiring is not up to par, you're not going to have the proper reading and the performance of your car is going to show for that. So hopefully you learned something. If you want to see more of this, we can add another video later on. Again, we didn't go into, full wire building from start to finish, but I wanted to go over the basics of crimping and the tools that you need to complete your wiring job. If you guys want to see more wiring videos or you have something specific, just please reach out in the comments or email us. We'll be glad to make a video for you. Hope you enjoyed today.